This video is brought to you in part by TCGplayer.com. If you're interested in viewing this deck list, just click the first link in the description. What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Julie from Mtg. We like magic, and today I got a deck for you that you've been giving me daily requests for, like since the day Hour of Devastation came out. Today we're finally going to do green-white Majestic Myriarch, and it's on a budget and it's rotation proof, all the things. So enjoy. Here's the deck. I think a good starting point is the 4 copies of Majestic Myriarch. Seems about right. We're going to definitely play a playset of this. Our game plan is to get this by turn 5 every game, so we have to play as many copies as we're legally allowed to play. Well, if you haven't seen or read Myriarch in a while, it's basically a selfish version of Odric, you know? Instead of spreading all of the abilities of your team to the rest of your team, you're basically just giving all of your team's abilities to one huge dude and swinging in with him. I kind of like this, and here's a weird analogy, but bear with me. I kind of liken it to playing like Enchantress or Bogle's decks. Any deck, really, that's looking to play like a smallish guy in the early game and then put a bunch of enchantments on it to buff it, swing in with it, you know? This is sort of the inverse of that. Instead of playing our early guy and then buffing him with enchantments, we're playing a bunch of stuff that buffs Majestic Myriarch, in this case creatures, instead of enchantments, which I think is a much better deal than having to play enchantments. And then when we drop our Myriarch, he's already buffed from all of these things. It's sort of like playing an Enchantress deck in reverse, and you can swing with your enchantments. That's just cool. If we're going to break Myriarch, we have to do 2 things. First and foremost, 1, we have to play a bunch of creatures to make it as big as possible. And 2, those creatures have to have abilities, preferably more than 1 if we can pull that off. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the rest of the deck. And normally I would go through curve order, but instead I'm going to go through what sort of has been a loose order of importance while I've been playing this deck. With that in mind, the first creature I want to show you other than Myriarch is definitely the 4 copies of Ariel Responder, man. Ariel Responder is so good right now, even outside of the context of Majestic Myriarch deck, you know. Against a lot of the aggro in the format, this is just a crazy thing, you know. It swings in, gain you 2 life, leaves itself up to block the next turn. That's all good, you know. And there's not really a whole lot of flying in this format. The format is slightly weak to flyers. There are some, don't get me wrong, but we aren't seeing as many as we normally see. That's all I'm saying. The spread of flyers is definitely lower than usual. So being able to not only fly in with this thing, but give our Majestic Myriarch flying is of utmost importance. And the fact that we can give our Myriarch vigilance is also important, you know, because Majestic Myriarch triggers at the beginning of both combat phases, you know, ours and our opponents. So giving it vigilance essentially makes it twice as good in a way. So vigilance is important, and obviously lifelink is too, because we're looking to have a 6+ power Myriarch, usually 10 or 12 power if we get our way Myriarch, and having lifelink with something like that that also has flying and vigilance is just unbelievable. You'll close games fast, or at least make your opponent scoop when you're putting up like 12-point life swings every turn. Responder also helps you get to Majestic Myriarch and then still develop your board a little bit, you know. The ability to get into damage, guaranteed 2 life gain unless they kill it, you know, is really important, prolongs the game a good bit, and it can block while it's at it, even if it just attacked, and gain you more life too. So this really goes a long way in extending the game a good bit so that you can develop your board and eventually get to a huge Myriarch. We're going to play 3 copies of Aethersphere Harvester in the deck, more flying and lifelink for our Myriarch. You know, I think these are 2 of the best abilities that we can give Myriarch right now. It's just like guaranteed evasion against a host of decks in the format, and allowing for huge lifelink swings is just ridiculous. Like, it just puts you way over a lot of aggro right now. So really love flying and lifelink. We're going to do as much with those as we possibly can. And Aethersphere Harvester is, again, outside of the context of this deck, just a good card in the current format, and we can crew easily in this deck. You know, we got 25 creatures, not counting vehicles. We have to play a bunch of creatures anyway. All of our creatures can obviously crew Aethersphere Harvester, so definite 3 copies of this. It earns its slots. This is a great card. We're going to play 2 copies of Ronis the Indomitable in the deck. He's the most expensive card in the deck, but you definitely want to pack a couple of copies at least of a Ronis. First of all, he makes 3 abilities available to our Myriarch. That's cool right there. Now the Death Touch isn't super important most of the time. We're looking to have like a 6/6 or 8/8 or more, you know, Majestic Myriarch. So Death Touch isn't super important. It's often redundant, but Indestructible is incredibly important obviously. This is really kind of like the best ability we can give Majestic Myriarch. So definitely, all the stuff we can give, give him indestructible with, we want to play. And Ronis is probably the best card we can play that does that, save for maybe one other. And the other thing is that he can, or at least is capable of, giving Myriarch trample, and that's super important too, to make sure they can't just chump your Myriarch. And one more cool thing to point out is that if you have a Ronis and a Myriarch, then your Ronis can swing. Obviously, you have a 4/4 creature because you have Myriarch and another creature, so you can swing 9 at least indestructible. Pretty sweet. Another god, though, we're going to play 2 copies of Oketra the True in the deck. Yes, sir, we're going to play Oketra the True in the deck. This just does kind of everything we want. I don't want to play a bunch of copies of it because we're usually not going to get to play a second copy. If we already have one on the battlefield. Don't want to get stuck in my hand, but I definitely want to play at least the 2 copies of it, First of all, Double Strike is another one of the most desirable abilities we could possibly have on a Myriarch, Essentially, if we have just an Oketra and a Myriarch, our Myriarch can swing for 8 indestructible. How sweet is that, And obviously, we're playing a bunch of creatures in the deck already, so Oketra is going to be turned on a good bit of the time. That's cool. And she makes other dudes, and every time we make a creature with Oketra, not only does she get closer to swinging, but Majestic Myriarch gets +2/+2 whenever we make one of those tokens. It just literally does all the things for the deck, so we're going to play a couple of copies. And one more thing, by the way, before I move on from gods are just cool in this deck because regardless of whether or not they can swing at the time, they're more than happy to give their abilities over to Majestic Myriarch so he can do stuff with them. And they can crew vehicles, and we're playing some vehicles in this deck other than Aethersphere Harvester. I'll get to those in a second, but first I'm going to show you the 4 copies of Adorned Pouncer in this deck, because this card is great. Early game, if aggro can't, spray it or Fatal Push it or whatever, then it can basically just kill, most of their early creatures. Earthshaker Kenra, Falconwrath Gorger, Village Messenger, Bomat Courier. It can kill, 80% of the stuff in their deck and survive. So that's cool, doesn't even have to trade most of the time. So, like it just for that reason. It's not a bad defensive tool, but even if it does die, you can bring it back later as a 4/4 double strike that also enables your Majestic Myriarch to have double strike. That's 6 things in the deck that can give it DS. That's a pretty sweet number, Double strike is just a crazy ability always. Double strike is just a hair away from being broken in most cases. And Majestic Myriarch with double strike and flying and vigilance and lifelink is just the dumbest thing you've ever seen. It's also cool, by the way, this is just something that keeps coming up when I'm playing the deck, is that you can go turn 2 Adorned Pouncer, it dies at some point, turn 5 Majestic Myriarch, turn 6 just eternalize your Pouncer. Basically you'll give your Majestic Myriarch +2/+2 and double strike is swinging at least 8 if you just eternalize your cat, and usually it'll swing for far more than that because you'll have a couple of other creatures on the battlefield. So Adorned Pouncer is just awesome, resilient piece against control decks and stuff, or decks with lots of removal. So Adorned Pouncer is another card that's good outside of this deck and just makes this deck way better. I feel like now's a good time to tell you about the 1 copy of Angel of Invention. Just the one. I don't want to play a bunch of 5-drops. It seems kind of sketch, but I will squeeze in one more 5-drop for the Angel of Invention because it's so good. We're playing a bunch of creatures in this deck, and it gives a buff to all of those, and it gives a bunch of abilities to our Majestic Myriarch, and it gives Myriarch +7/+7. If we get the servos. So, just again, this is another card. Again, I keep saying this, but just another card that's decent outside of this deck already and is also tailor-made for this deck. So, I at least want to squeeze in the 1 copy. Be bold. Play 5 5-drops. Here's that vehicle I was talking about a little bit earlier. We're going to play 4 whole copies, bear with me here, of Fleetwheel Cruiser in the deck. The most recent addition to the deck, and seriously, kind of one of the best cards in the deck. It has radically changed the way the deck plays. Trample and Haste, especially Haste, are incredible abilities to give to Majestic Myriarch, man. It just really feels bad to plop down that Majestic Myriarch and then have to wait a whole turn to attack with it. So Haste is incredible. Making your Majestic come out of nowhere is one of the best things you can do in the deck. And the ability to do it on curve, by the way, turn 4 Fleetwheel, turn 5 Myriarch, is just one of the best ways you can curve, in the format I'm convinced of it. Whew, got a little excited, sorry about that, but I'm just telling you, Fleetwheel Cruiser is worth it. But now, let's get on to the rest of the creatures, because there are actually still more creatures, including 4 copies of Eddie Trail Hawk. You might be a little surprised to see this, I imagine. This is one of the best 2-drops that we can play in this deck. I'm so serious. We could play Heart of Kirin, but I'm a little worried about a density of vehicles in and not being able to crew it and stuff. So instead of Heart and of adding $10 or $12 to the budget, I decided to play Eddy Trail Hawk instead. And this has good things. This not only does give flying to our Majestic Myriarch, but it's also extra energy for our Aethersphere Harvester if we want it. So that's cool too. Or we can just use the energy for what we're supposed to use it for and give other creatures flying. Like give Ronis flying or give the double striking Oketra flying. Like that's cool too. So Eddy Trail Hawk is not actually bad. It kind of does a lot for just 2 mana. I've sort of worked my way backwards from the top of the curve to the bottom here, but we'll finish it off with a couple of 1-drops for playing, starting with the 3 copies of Sacred Cat. At this point, I kind of feel like a broken record, but I really like Sacred Cat in the current format. Especially just against Ramonap Red specifically. There's a bunch of cards this can block and trade with, and you'll get it back. That's cool. And in this deck, it's just basically 1 mana to ensure that your Majestic Myriarch has lifelink. We already have a bunch of stuff that has lifelink, but just in case, you have the ability to, if Sacred Cat's in your graveyard, just pay 1 to give Myriarch lifelink. That's a good deal too. So, card's nice, card's fine, and it gives Myriarch +2/+2. So think about it that way. For just 1 mana, +2/+2 in lifelink. Well, not terrible. By the way, there's also the fact that even though these 1-drops may look a little bit on the weak side, we have to fill out our curve. We want to be able to, hopefully, play creatures all the way up until we play Myriarch to make sure that Myriarch is as big as we can make it. So, even though these 1-drops may look a little slim, I still feel the need to play some 1-drops. So, with that in mind, let's look at the last creature in the deck. One fun-of copy of Wily Bandar. Well, this is kind of just the cheapest way in the deck to make sure that your Myriarch has Indestructible. It's just 5 cents for a card that can give Myriarch Indestructible. And if you can't afford Ronis's or whatever, just increase Wily Bandar. You do have to worry, just in general, about whenever, you put its ability on the stack or whenever Majestic Myriarch's trigger goes on the stack at the beginning of combat. You do have to worry about people responding to the fact that it's about to get Indestructible by killing it. You do have to worry about that. People can do it, but that said, I still want a 5th way and some kind of want even more ways of giving it Indestructible, because I think Indestructible is just kind of the best ability we can give to it at the end of the day. Just a few final finishing thoughts on these 1-drop creatures before I move on, just so you know how important they are in the construction of the deck. Not only do I think that we need to fill out our curve for Myriarch, we also need to fill out our curve for Oketra. These count as creatures because they are creatures. They have that type. So, they help you swing with Oketra on curve, which is pretty important. And if they got nothing better to do, they can at least crew your Aethersphere Harvester too. So, you got that going for you. Just they do a lot of little things and tie up some loose ends in the deck. That leaves room for just 3 spells in the deck, and I'm going to use those slots protecting our investment with Blossoming Defense. Because nothing feels worse than, finally getting to your Majestic Myriarch and they just kill it. Here's a card that kills that thing. Okay, well, that was my whole game plan. So we're definitely going to play some Blossoming Defense to make sure that doesn't happen. And sometimes you might want to wait until you get 6 mana to play that Myriarch and back it up with a Blossoming Defense. It all depends situationally on what's going on the board. But if you can wait, maybe you should, especially depending on what you're playing against. Not only that, but it does other stuff, just like all the other cards. It's sort of a theme in this deck, relative versatility in a lot of ways. Our cards do cool stuff outside of just the context of Majestic Myriarch, This can also, buff creatures in combat so that they can, take your opponent by surprise. We got a bunch of lifelink creatures, so buffs with those are pretty sweet, Protects other things that we might want to protect, like Ariel Responder. Protects it from a Braid. That's pretty cool. Remember that. Also protects all of our crewed artifact creatures, our vehicles, from things like a Braid as well. So remember that. If they try to abrade a Fleetwheel Cruiser, for instance, you can always just crew it at instant speed and then Blossoming Defense it. That's nice to know. And another quick piece of tech, this can also make a relatively small creature big enough for Ronis if you don't have quite enough mana to actually use his ability. Here are the lands right here. We're going to play 25 of them, and it might sound like maybe a land too much, but I want to get to 5 mana every game, no matter what, on curve. So we got to be able to do that. And we're protecting against Flood a little bit with the cycling green-white land. So got that going for us too. And Hash Up Oasis and Shefet Dunes, I've talked about these before. These are actually unbelievable cards. And it's also worth noting that, again, in the context of Ronis, Hash Up Oasis can make a creature way big. It can make our 1-drops big enough to let Ronis swing. That is super, super important. I should also mention that you could drop Ether Hub in here, We're trying to make 2 colors, and we've got other cards in the deck that produce energy. So if you wanted to spend an extra $10, you could play the 4 copies of Ether Hub, and I wouldn't blame you for that. And I've said this before, but you might want to go ahead and get your copies of Sun Petal Grove. Because in just a month, those are going to, well, 6 weeks or so, those are going to be legal to play in Standard. I promise you. So get your Sun Petal Groves if you don't have them yet. Here's our sideboard right here. We're definitely going to make that a playset of Blossoming Defense. I feel like that's a no-brainer. We're going to play Manglehorn here over Dissenter's Deliverance, mostly because it's a creature, and it will make Majestic Myriarch bigger. Doesn't give it any abilities, but again, I want to play creatures over spells if we possibly can in this deck. So Manglehorn gets the nod over Deliverance. I'm going to play 1 copy of Heroic Intervention. It's more or less a 5th copy of Blossoming Defense that can protect our entire team against things like Sweltering Suns. That's pretty relevant too, so Heroic Intervention gets a slot. 4, Prepare to Fight for when we really want combat tricks and removal. That's usually against aggro, although I usually don't side in all 4 copies. You know, we just don't want to side out so many creatures that we have to board in all 4, but not really sure what else to use those slots on. Help me out with that. We're going to play 3 copies of Cast Out, again when we need removal, especially against Planeswalkers and really non-creature permanents, but just really is a catch-all, and that's awesome. We're going to play some Cast Out. And then probably the most interesting card on the board is the 2 copies of Angel of Condemnation. This gives 2 abilities to Majestic Myriarch, yeah, but I feel like it's a little bit too slow to play in the main deck. This is really good in grindy matchups, though, where it can sometimes snag more than 1 creature off your opponent's side of the board and throw it into exile before it dies. That's pretty cool, and it can protect your own dudes, too, so it's at least worth noting. And here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 60 points, which isn't bad. It's $1 a point. It's about $60 to buy this deck on TCG Player, so that's not a really high cost, especially for something that's rotation-proof. And a blast to play, man. This deck is pretty consistent, curves out really well, uses its mana really well all throughout the game. It's got some resilient options like Adorned Pouncer, and even Sacred Cat ain't bad. And you got like clean answers to stuff. You know, even though we're not playing a bunch of removal, something like Fleetwheel Cruiser can be a really nice answer to a Planeswalker cleanly. You just keep that in mind. You know, we got Blossoming Defense, which is essentially a counter spell and a pump spell and protects all of our creatures in combat. We can, even if we never draw a Majestic Myriarch, just prolong the game with our lifelink guys and fly over for a bunch of damage at the same time. So we can win fairly easily, even if the game plan of Majestic Myriarch doesn't play out. So we're a relatively versatile deck here with a few different game plans. But if we do get a big Myriarch, it's often lights out if we can protect it. You know, we're just going to have this, like, oftentimes 8/8 or 10/10 flying, trample, sometimes haste, indestructible, vigilance, lifelink dude that we're swinging in with. And if our opponent can answer it, they're dead in just a couple of turns. Sometimes a turn 5 Majestic Myriarch feels like basically, you know, reanimating an Ulamog, but better in some ways. Like, it feels like reanimating an Akroma from way back in the day, but better. And there are some things, by the way, that I didn't play here that I want to just discuss for just a moment. I've already said that I didn't play Heart of Kiran, but you could play that if you had the budget in mind for it. But again, I'm a little bit scared about an overabundance of vehicles in the deck, and I'm a little scared about being able to crew it consistently. So you can try Heart of Kiran. I didn't. I have my doubts, and I also didn't want to spend $5 a pop on it. But at least it's down to $5, so that's good. Something else I didn't play was Gideon of the Trials. I actually would really like to try this, but I didn't want to spend $10 a pop on what would probably be 2 or 3 Gideons. At least, if not all 4. This is another thing that could technically give our Majestic Myriarch indestructible. That's always awesome. And along the way, it could provide some defense for us with its first ability and keep us from losing the game, as long as we have it on the battlefield. So all of those seems like really important things to be able to do. So I wouldn't be averse to playing Gideon in the deck. And the last thing I didn't play that's not really super budget, it's only like 15 cents right now, and you could try, is Ramanap Hydra. This gives 3 abilities to Majestic Myriarch. Now, Reach isn't super important, but Trample and Vigilance are pretty important. But I kind of thought that we were already playing a glut of 4 drops, you know. Really didn't want to budge on Fleetwheel Cruiser, didn't want to budge on Oketra, and honestly, I might play Crocodile of the Crossing over this just because of the haste. But I can't argue that 3 abilities is a lot, and we are playing Desert, so Ramanap Hydra might be a consideration. Aside from that, if I didn't play anything that you're surprised not to see here, let me know. It's entirely possible I missed something crazy. Remember, this is rotation-proof, so no Lone Rider. There's other stuff, you know. Just let me know if I didn't play something that really should be in here. And if you get in some games with it, let me know how it did. I've been actually fairly impressed with this deck compared to how I thought it would perform. Let me just say that. Especially against the aggro decks in the format. Most definitely Ramanap Red even. The deck has a lot of flying and a lot of lifelink to prolong the game. Once you drop your Myriarch, they don't really have a lot of removal for that. You know, 6/6 or 8/8 Myriarch. They really don't. They have a hard time answering that. So if you can get to it, and again, we're playing a bunch of lifelinkers to make it easier to get to it, you can often turn the corner against those small aggro decks. So try this thing out. Let me know how you felt about it. And if you're interested in trying it out or just viewing the deck list or even just helping out the channel, just click the first link in the description. That take you over to tcgplayer.com. You can look at the deck from there. You can also like the video if you like the video. Follow us on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. And finally, I just want to say this, by the way, thanks to my patrons, we're finally getting a new camera. I'm not going to say much else about it. It'll be here over the weekend, and after that, I'm going to be playing with it for a day or two. But within the next week or so, we should have majorly upgraded picture quality on the channel. This is the most requested thing for the channel for its entire existence, is to upgrade the video quality. I don't know why you'd want to see my ugly mug more clearly, but you will be in just a few days. So thanks on my Patreons, and it's like the most exciting thing that's happened to the channel in a while. Thank you so, so much. But anyway, I'm Deb from SBMTG. Make sure you subscribe if you're new, especially because it's going to look better at least in the next week or so here. So do that, and Ixalan spoilers are coming up. Don't want to miss those. Hit the bell for the notifications and do the rest of the YouTube stuff. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards.